Your mind isn't loud for no reason. It's filling a gap.
Exactly.
You wake up, right? You haven't moved. You haven't spoken to anyone. You haven't even thrown off the covers yet. But your heart is already racing. And your brain is just screaming at you about, I don't know, an email you sent 3 years ago.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Right. Or it's a vague sense of dread about your career, or this rapidly spiraling checklist of things you haven't accomplished. Your body is perfectly still, but you already feel incredibly, profoundly drained.
Which makes no sense on the surface.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Why is your mind working so hard to exhaust you before your feet even hit the floor? Well, it's not a glitch. Your mind isn't panicking because it's full, it's panicking because it's empty. So welcome to this deep dive. Today we're exploring a psychological phenomenon that is, frankly, as agonizing as it is invisible.
It really is.
We're talking about the exhausting paradox of feeling physically drained but mentally loud, and how a lack of meaningful engagement in your daily life actually triggers this excessive overthinking.
Yeah, it's a devastating paradox to live with. And honestly, it's far more common than most people realize. We are looking at a fundamental survival mechanism that has essentially been turned inward.
Right.
Because the human brain, it just abhors a cognitive vacuum. When it lacks structured, meaningful stimulation, it doesn't just power down into a state of peaceful zen. I mean, I wish it did, but it doesn't.
That would be nice, but no.
Right. It aggressively fills that empty space with unguided, chaotic thoughts. So our goal today is to decode the mechanics behind this noise. How does the brain construct it? How does the modern world make it worse? And crucially, how do we differentiate between just passive distraction and the kind of genuine engagement that actually forces the mind to quiet down?
And to figure all this out, we are synthesizing a really fascinating stack of research today. We've got existential psychology papers from Lund University, a study on inner monologues from Otterbein University, some deep research on goal disengagement, and what's called an action crisis.
That action crisis research is wild, by the way.
Oh, it's so good. We're also weaving in a consumer well-being paper on minimalism, a clinical framework on burnout, a very raw discussion from the Tar Mental Health Reddit community, and a viral YouTube essay by Solace Fox. The mission here is to give you a blueprint of your own mental machinery.
Because once you understand why the engine is revving so loudly, you can actually figure out how to take it out of neutral.
Exactly. So let's start with the lived experience, because, I mean, the academic literature is dense, but the reality of this is just intensely visceral.
It really is. If we look at that thread from the Tsar mental health community, a user posted a question that just immediately went viral. They asked, does anyone else feel empty but mentally loud at the same time?
Wow. Yeah, that phrasing is perfect.
Right. And the responses were overwhelming. People were describing this complete internal void. No passion, no drive, no clear sense of self, but simultaneously feeling like they were trapped inside a crowded room where like 100 different radios were tuned to 100 different stations, all playing at maximum volume.
Empty, but mentally loud. It captures the contradiction perfectly, because usually we associate a loud mind with a full life, you know, like a CEO managing a huge company or an ER doctor.
Yes, exactly. People actively solving problems.
But the people describing this state aren't managing a crisis. They're sitting on their couches. Which reminds me of that distinction in the Solace Fox essay between physical fatigue and mental fatigue.
Oh, that's a crucial distinction.
Right. Because when you feel this specific brand of exhaustion, your mind isn't tired from producing brilliant insights. It's exhausted from the constant background management of random, unnecessary thoughts. The essay calls them mental weeds. They aren't crops you planted, they're invasive species.
That weed metaphor is so apt, but to really understand the mechanism, we have to look at how the brain manages its energy. Biologically, the brain is an incredibly expensive organ to run. I mean, it's about 2% of our body weight, but it consumes nearly 20% of our daily caloric intake.
That is a massive energy drain.
Huge. So from an evolutionary standpoint, the brain is fundamentally designed to conserve energy. It wants to automate tasks, form habits, power down non-essential systems. When you're sitting still doing nothing, the brain should ideally be in a low-power restorative state.
Okay, wait. If my brain is this highly evolved supercomputer trying to save energy at all costs, why is it spinning up the cooling fans and burning out the processor when I'm literally just staring at the ceiling? That feels like a catastrophic design flaw.
Well, it looks like a flaw until you realize the brain isn't just sitting idle, it's running a background diagnostic that got stuck in a loop. Think of a computer's defragmentation process, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's supposed to organize files and then go to sleep. but instead it just keeps spinning the hard drive, endlessly searching for a file that isn't there. It generates immense heat and slows everything down. In the human brain, this background process is called the default mode network, or the DMN.
Oh, the default mode network.
Hmm.
I've seen this term in studies about like meditation and psychedelics. This is the part of the brain that lights up when we stop paying attention to the outside
I
world.
got it. When you're focused on an external task, your brain's task positive network is engaged and the DMN is suppressed. But the second you stop that task, the DMN activates. And evolutionarily, it has a purpose. It simulates future threats, like, what will I do if the tiger comes back?
Right, or what if the tribe kicks me out?
Exactly. Under healthy conditions, it allows for creative rest and problem solving. But if you're experiencing that empty but loud phenomenon, the DMN isn't being creative, it's torturing you.
Because it's fueled by anxiety and a lack of authentic purpose.
Yes. If you don't give the brain a concrete, meaningful problem to solve in the real world, the DMN doesn't just shut off. It hallucinates threats. It simulates social rejections that haven't even happened. It's trying to simulate engagement, but without a real-world anchor, it just chews on itself.
And we live in a culture that completely exacerbates this. We are conditioned from a very young age to equate constant worrying and hyper-analyzing with productivity. If you're stressed, it means you care.
That cultural conditioning is such a trap. It leads to this subversive psychological reality where the mental chatter, as painful as it is actually comforting to the ego.
Wait, really? Comforting?
Yeah, because it's familiar. Being mentally busy creates a shield. It makes you feel productive even when you aren't doing anything. Because think about the alternative. For someone who feels empty inside, quiet is terrifying territory. When the noise fades, that's when buried emotions and unresolved existential questions finally surface.
Oh, wow. So you're generating the noise deliberately so you don't have to listen to the silence.
Exactly.
I want to use an analogy here to make this really visceral. Imagine your mind is a high-performance sports car engine. You've left it idling in neutral in the driveway, but you've placed a heavy brick on the gas pedal.
I love this analogy.
Right. The engine is roaring, it's making a deafening amount of noise, burning premium fuel, generating immense heat, but the car isn't moving an inch. It's just destroying its own components. The noise gives the illusion of speed, but the reality is complete stagnation.
And that illusion of speed blurs the line between intentional thinking and mental chatter. Intentional thinking is linear. You identify a problem, make a decision, execute an action. Mental chatter is circular. You identify a vague threat, panic about it, imagine the worst-case scenario, get exhausted, and then start the loop over again.
You never arrive at an action.
Never.
So if the engine is running in neutral, it's because it has nowhere to go. The cognitive noise isn't the actual disease. It's merely a symptom of a much deeper structural absence in a person's life.
Which brings us directly into existential psychology, specifically the research from Lund University, which is rooted in the work of the Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. Existential psychology deals with how we confront the big questions: mortality, illness, our choices.
And Viktor Frankl is a towering figure here. He was a neurologist and psychiatrist who survived multiple Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He observed human psychology under the most unimaginably horrific conditions.
Yes, and his core observation was that the survivors weren't necessarily the youngest or physically strongest. The survivors were overwhelmingly the individuals who managed to retain a sense of meaning.
The moment a prisoner lost their grip on a future-oriented goal like seeing a loved one again, their physical decline was incredibly rapid.
The loss of meaning preceded the failure of the body. And from this, Frankl developed logotherapy. He challenged Freud's idea that we're driven by the will to pleasure and Adler's idea of the will to power. Frankl said, no, the primary drive is the will to meaning.
We desperately need to find purpose.
We do, and Frankl argued that when this drive for meaning is blocked or unfulfilled, it results in a psychological state he termed the existential vacuum.
Yeah, existential vacuum,
Mm.
the void. And he noted that this vacuum manifests primarily as a profound state of boredom, right?
Yes, boredom is the hallmark of it. He made a distinction between traditional Freudian neuroses, which are conflicts between unconscious drives, and what he called a neugenic neurosis.
Neugenic meaning from the mind or spirit.
Exactly. It's a spiritual and existential suffering. It's the distress that arises when your life lacks purpose.
I'm stuck on this idea of boredom, though. Usually if I'm bored, I just watch a movie or take a nap. Boredom feels passive. How does sitting around with nothing to do mutate into the screaming mental noise we're talking about?
Because human boredom isn't just a lack of stimulation, it's an acute awareness of your own lack of utility. The Lund University research heavily cites social psychologist Roy Baumeister here. He identified 4 basic needs for meaning: purpose, value, efficacy, and self-worth.
Okay, so purpose is a direction to move in. Value is feeling your actions are worthwhile. Efficacy is believing you can exert control. And self-worth is feeling inherently valuable.
Right. And if your life lacks those 4 pillars, your brain doesn't just accept it, it absolutely rejects it. The existential vacuum opens up and the default mode network hits the panic button. It realizes a lack of utility is dangerous to survival, so it begins to simulate problems.
It manufactures a fake purpose.
Yes. It turns a minor social interaction from yesterday into a massive puzzle that needs to be solved through hours of rumination. It converts the passive pain of boredom into the active pain of anxiety. Because anxiety, at the very least, feels like you're doing something.
That completely reframes anxiety. It's not a broken component. It's the brain functioning exactly as it should, just in a total vacuum. And Frankl observed this on a societal level with his Sunday neurosis, didn't he?
He did. The Sunday neurosis is this heavy depression and anxiety that reliably hits people on Sunday afternoons. Think about the work week. From Monday to Friday, the modern world provides the noise for you. You have emails, meetings, a schedule.
Your attention is hijacked. You don't have to generate your own meaning.
But then Sunday afternoon hits. The external structure has evaporated, you are sitting alone, the mask of busyness is removed, and you are forced to stare directly into your own existential vacuum.
Frankl also saw this with unemployment neurosis in Vienna in the 1920s, right?
Yeah.
He was treating young, jobless men who were severely depressed.
Yes, and the natural assumption is they were depressed because of poverty. But Frankl realized the root wasn't purely economic, it was psychological. They equated being jobless with being useless, and being useless with a meaningless life. They lost the efficacy and value pillars.
So how did he treat it? Did he just prescribe medication?
No, he used a purely structural intervention. He persuaded them to engage in rigorous, unpaid volunteer work. Youth organizations, public libraries.
And the depression vanished.
Yeah.
Almost universally.
Exactly. Their economic conditions hadn't improved at all. They were still struggling to afford food. But because they filled their empty time with an activity that gave them a tangible sense of purpose, the existential vacuum closed. The mental noise quieted down.
Man does not live by welfare alone. That is a staggering proof of concept. It really shows that mental noise is tied to our daily actions. Let me bring in another analogy. Think of your mind as a highly ambitious, highly energetic, but slightly neurotic intern at a corporate office.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If you bring this intern in, but you refuse to give them a meaningful project, they aren't going to just sit quietly. They will invent work.
They're going to reorganize the supply closet 15 times.
Exactly. They'll send you frantic 5-paragraph emails about color-coding paperclips. They will invent complex problems just to feel engaged and prove they're valuable. The noise in your head is that intern, desperate for a project, tearing apart the supply closet of your memories.
And the researchers at Lund University actually quantified this exact dynamic using modern psychometric tools. They used the General Health Questionnaire, or GHQ-12, and the Purpose in Life test, the PL-20.
What are those measuring exactly?
The GHQ-12 measures psychological distress, the volume of the cognitive noise. Questions like, have you lost sleep over worry? The PL-20 measures the strength of your existential foundation. Statements like having clear goals versus no goals at all.
And there was a definitive link.
An incredibly strong association. Low levels of distress are inextricably linked to a high score on the Purpose in Life test. But here's the nuance. They found that mere will to meaning, just wanting your life to matter, is not enough.
Just wanting a purpose while not having one actually increases the frustration, I'd imagine.
Exactly. What actually protects your mental health are meaning in existence and the freedom to create meaning. You have to perceive that your daily actions have tangible value right now, and you need the autonomy to construct that meaning yourself.
Okay, so the loud mind is a symptom of an existential vacuum. And this frantic search for problems almost always turns inward. It becomes a relentless voice inside our own skulls. Let's talk about that inner monologue. How does it turn toxic?
Well, this is mapped out beautifully in the clinical thesis from Otterbein University. They explore the pristine inner experience, which is the psychological term for the inner monologue, or self-talk.
They break down a couple of theories about why we talk to ourselves. The first is the social isolation hypothesis.
Right. This suggests that people who spend significant amounts of time alone or feel socially disconnected use their internal self-talk as a substitute for real conversation.
The brain needs a social matrix, so if you aren't getting external feedback, it basically plays both sides of the chessboard.
Exactly. It generates dialogue internally to simulate a social environment. But the danger there leads us to the second theory, the cognitive disruption theory. People experiencing high anxiety or depression rely on their inner monologue to try and self-soothe. But because their cognitive framework is already disrupted by that existential vacuum, the tool fails. Instead of soothing, they fall into ruminative traps.
And the study categorizes different flavors of this inner voice.
Right. Yes. You have spontaneous dialogues, which are just wandering musings, social dialogues where you replay past arguments, identity dialogues grappling with your sense of the self, and self-management dialogues like coaching yourself through a task.
Those all sound fine, but then there's the dark side.
The ruminative dialogues, endless self-blame, highlighting every flaw, every failure. And the tragic irony in the survey data is that when asked why they talk to themselves, most people said for self-regulation. They instinctively use their inner voice to process emotions.
But individuals with high anxiety experience drastically higher rates of self-critical self-talk. The tool they're using to regulate distress is actively magnifying it.
It's heartbreaking. One participant wrote, "My brain is the harshest environment. I've gotten better at speaking softly to myself, but ultimately my first reaction is to criticize."
And this leads to an avoidance behavior, doesn't it? The research noted some people intentionally force themselves to stay constantly busy just so they don't have to hear their own self-talk.
They are quite literally running from their own minds. The noise has been weaponized against the driver.
It's like living with a toxic roommate who is relentlessly cruel. They criticize everything you do. So, to survive, you start inviting loud, random strangers over to the apartment every single day. You blast the TV, throw wild parties. You don't even like the strangers. You just need their noise to drown out the roommate's voice.
That is a perfect analogy. You burn energy managing the strangers just to survive the roommate.
But logically, why does the internal coach turn into the cool roommate in the first place? If self-talk evolved as a regulatory tool, why does it get so vicious?
Because the self-critical anxiety is the brain working without a job. When we lack external, meaningful engagement, those identity dialogues connecting us to a larger purpose, the brain's problem-solving apparatus turns inward. It dissects the self.
The ego becomes the project.
Precisely. Without an external goal to critique, the brain attempts to improve the self by identifying all your flaws. Plus, when you isolate yourself, you lose external social mirroring.
Like getting a reality check from a friend.
Yeah, right. If your inner voice says, "I am a failure," a friend will say, "That's ridiculous, you just got a promotion." The external feedback corrects the distortion. But alone in the vacuum, the roommate's voice becomes the unchallenged truth.
So how do you hack that? How do you disrupt that loop when you're alone?
The Otterbein research points to a specific cognitive technique: distanced self-talk, or placing oneself in a third-person position. When the ruminative spiral starts, you force a linguistic shift. You stop using the words I or me. You use your own name.
So instead of "why am I so anxious?" I would say, "Why is the host feeling so anxious right now?"
Yes, it sounds silly, but the neurological impact is profound. By creating that linguistic distance, you shift the brain's processing out of the highly emotional amygdala and into the analytical cerebral cortex.
You trick your brain into thinking it's analyzing someone else's problem. And we're always kinder to our friends than ourselves.
Exactly. You step into the role of the objective observer. It reorients the self-talk back to emotional regulation.
That's a phenomenal tool.
Yeah.
But we have to acknowledge that sometimes the loudest noise doesn't come from emptiness. Sometimes it's deafening because we are heavily engaged in a pursuit, but it's a pursuit that is actively destroying us. Which brings us to the action crisis.
Yes, the loud mind caused by doing the wrong thing for too long. We're drawing from a major paper on the consequences of an action crisis.
Let's define it. An action crisis is that agonizing phase where you've invested heavily in a goal, a degree, a career, or a relationship, but you suffer severe setbacks. You're completely torn between pushing forward and desperately wanting to quit. Do I stop or do I go?
To understand this, researchers use Klinger's incentive disengagement cycle. It maps out the emotional phases of a blocked goal. First is the invigoration phase.
Where you hit a wall and just double down. Push harder.
Right. You try to overcome it with sheer willpower. But if it remains blocked, you enter the second phase.
Aggression.
Internal hostility. Getting angry at the setbacks, resentful of your peers. Yes, toxic friction. And if that fails, you fall into the third phase. Depression. Not necessarily clinical depression, but profound resignation. You're a ghost going through the motions.
And the final phase is recovery, right, where you let go and are open to new goals.
But an action crisis is when you get stuck in the middle, between aggression and depression. You're unable to reach recovery because you refuse to let go. And the cognitive noise this generates is unbelievable. To exit this implemental mindset, your brain actually has to violently degrade the goal.
It has to shadow the rose-colored glasses so you can see the massive debt, the toxic culture, the loss of free time. It's a war inside your head. And this has physical consequences, right?
The paper details a study on marathon runners experiencing an action crisis. They found significantly higher cortisol secretion, the stress hormone in conflicted runners, compared to runners who were just tired but committed. The mental conflict was literally breaking down their physical biology.
And this connects seamlessly to the clinical framework on burnout from the journal Frontiers.
Yes. The Maslach Burnout Inventory categorizes burnout into 3 dimensions: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization or cynicism, and feelings of inefficiency.
Which map perfectly onto Klinger's phases. Invigoration leads to exhaustion. Aggression leads to cynicism. Depression leads to inefficiency.
The Frontiers paper makes a bold claim. Burnout is not an issue of scheduling. Burnout is a manifestation of Frankl's existential vacuum within the workplace. It's a crisis of meaning.
And this is fueled by pseudo-motivation, a concept from Alfred Langel. Pseudo-motivation is working relentlessly just for external rewards. The paycheck, the status.
You're being pushed by external forces rather than attracted by the value of the work. You're doing it because I must have it, not because it aligns with your core values. This creates a massive gap between your subjective motive and your real actions.
And that leads to a defense mechanism called splitting, developed by Otto Kernberg, swinging wildly between all good and all bad. One day the company's going to change the world, the next day your boss is a sociopath and your life is a prison.
There is no middle ground. The goal possesses no structural integrity. The action crisis and burnout are 2 sides of the same coin. An ego refusing to let go of a structure that no longer serves the spirit.
It's like dangling over a massive drop holding a thick rope, but the rope is on fire. You're terrified of falling, so you hold on, but the rope is burning your hands. The pain of the burns is the cognitive dissonance. Your survival instinct screams, let go, but your ego screams, hold on.
That is exactly what the mind sounds like in an action crisis, the sound of burning hands.
But our culture is obsessed with grit. Never give up. So how does the listener differentiate between a healthy hurdle that requires grit and a toxic action crisis built on pseudo-motivation?
It comes down to clean fatigue versus dirty fatigue. Clean fatigue comes from true inner fulfillment. The work is hard, but the friction feels productive. You feel aligned with your actions, and the sleep you get is restorative.
And dirty fatigue.
Dirty fatigue is laced with bitterness, heavy cynicism, and a constant inner voice complaining about the injustice of it all. Every hurdle feels like a personal insult. If the work makes you resentful of your own life, you're not displaying grit. You are in an action crisis.
Clean versus dirty fatigue. That is a massive paradigm shift. Okay, so we've mapped the loud mind, the existential voids, the toxic inner monologue, the dirty fatigue of false goals. How do we clear the clutter and actually quiet the mind?
We look to a paper published in the PMC database called Goodbye Materialism. It explores the psychological impacts of minimalism and voluntary simplicity. And we need to frame minimalism correctly. It's not a sterile, hypermodern aesthetic.
Right, not just a white room with one uncomfortable chair.
No! Voluntary simplicity is a highly effective cognitive strategy for conserving mental energy. It's the intentional reduction of material consumption and external obligations so you have the bandwidth for deeply meaningful engagement.
The researchers use the term visual pollution, which I love. They found an effect size of 0.51 for minimalism on well-being, which is huge in statistical research. Removing non-essentials establishes a stronger sense of self and purpose.
Visual pollution is literal cognitive pollution. Every object, every app, every unread email demands a microfraction of your brain's processing power. It creates attention residue.
Even if you aren't looking at it.
Especially then, the brain flags them as unresolved tasks. By radically stripping away non-essentials, you give your default mode network less data to process. You take the brick off the gas pedal.
You defragment the hard drive by deleting useless files. And this paves the way for intentional silence, a concept from the Solis Fox essay. Silence isn't empty. It's clarity waiting to be heard.
And we have to contrast the loud mind with a flow state. Top athletes or surgeons don't mentally narrate their actions. They are completely immersed. The inner monologue dissolves into pure action.
But you can't achieve flow if your attention is fractured by pollution. We have to differentiate between passive distraction and active engagement.
Passive distraction is scrolling on your phone for 3 hours. It's low effort, high dopamine. It's inviting the chaotic strangers in to drown out the roommate. Active engagement like painting, writing code, volunteering requires deliberate attention currency, but it generates clean fatigue.
But what happens when the noise breaks through? Because the brain will occasionally panic. The Reddit user we talked about earlier had a breakthrough on this.
Yes, their follow-up is incredibly instructive. They realized the key wasn't fighting the noise or frantic distraction. The breakthrough was giving themselves grace, allowing space for the pain rather than villainizing themselves for it.
Which aligns with modern mindfulness and acceptance and commitment therapy, noticing without judgment.
Exactly. The suffering is caused by your resistance to the thought. You observe a cruel thought, recognize it as just a neurochemical reaction, and let it pass without attaching your core identity to it. You are the sky. Thoughts are just weather.
It's a diet for the mind. You wouldn't eat junk food all day and expect to feel energetic. You can't consume a diet of visual pollution, algorithmic news, and pseudo-motivational tasks and expect your brain to be calm. The mental noise is cognitive indigestion.
What you allow into your attention shapes the architecture of your mind.
But practically speaking, for someone deep in an action crisis, sitting in intentional silence sounds like torture. It sounds like locking yourself in a closet with a cruel roommate. What is the very first practical step someone can take today without triggering a panic attack?
You titrate the exposure. You don't start with absolute silence. You pair one internal cognitive release with one external structural change.
Walk us through that.
Internally, you practice the distanced self-talk. When panic hits, use your own name. Your name is feeling overwhelmed right now. That stops the immediate spiral. Then, externally, do one micro-act of voluntary simplicity. Declutter the surface of your desk or turn off non-essential phone notifications. Reclaim a fraction of your attention.
Stabilize the narrative, reduce the input. Then what?
Engage in one deeply meaningful, very low-stakes activity. Plant a seed, read a physical book, take a walk without your phone. You're gently guiding the DMN back to engaged reality. Proving to your nervous system it doesn't need to manufacture crises because you are providing a stable anchor.
Rebuilding the pillars of efficacy and value, one tiny brick at a time. This has been a monumental exploration today. We've established that a loud mind is just a tired mind trying to fill an existential gap.
Yes.
We saw how Viktor Frankl proved that without meaningful engagement, we fall into an existential vacuum. We looked at the Otterbein research on how isolation turns our inner monologue into a cruel roommate. We differentiated between the clean fatigue of authentic pursuit and the dirty fatigue of an action crisis. And finally, we explored how voluntary simplicity, protecting our attention and noticing without judgment, can help clear the mental weeds.
Once you understand the mechanics, you stop being a passive victim of the noise. It's just a misplaced survival mechanism, and you have the power to redirect it.
The noise isn't a life sentence. It's just a signal. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We've talked extensively about how your brain naturally tries to fill the void. But take a hard look at the structure of the world around you. The screens, the billboards, the apps. Is it possible that the modern attention economy, with its endless feeds, its manufactured daily outrage, its constant barrage of notifications, is deliberately engineering that exact existential vacuum within you, just so it can turn around and sell you the cheap passive distractions to fill it? Think about the business model. If they control the noise, they control your attention. If they control your attention, they control your energy. They literally own the gap in your mind. So what happens the moment you decide to take the silence back?